has been a naturalist and educator for over 40 years. And for 14 years, she worked here in Door County as the interpretive naturalist to sanctuary. Um, she is a member of Master Gardeners. In fact, she's the co-editor of our lovely newsletter. The other one's here. Thank you. Great newsletter. Thank you so much. This is a great one. Uh, she is also a board member of Wild One Star Peninsula. In fact, she's our treasurer. And in fact, she does all of our publicity. So that's great. She's also a master naturalist. Well, I'm going to say that. Not just math, she's the instructor. And she's done that for many years now, quite a few. So she is a master naturalist, master gardener, a wild one. And last year, she made a real contribution to our cause by working on the city committee that redid the city ordinance on native plants. So we are really grateful to her for that. But right now, she is the nursery manager of your landscape. And actually, I think you may be doing more for the environment there than you do in all these other things because you give people advice on what plants will grow where. And so I am very proud to introduce Karen. She's also my friend. So welcome, Karen. Right now, I think she is planning an intermission and there will be food then. And so how are we going to know? You're just going to say, we, we will know.
All right, thank you very much, Kagan. How does that pick up? Is that pretty good where it is? Okay. I can't really hear it up very well up here, so that's all right. Well, thank you, Kagan. That introduction made me sound like, sound a whole lot better or more intelligent or more well-read than what I really am. I will say that even though I am a master gardener volunteer and a master naturalist instructor, I'm not really a master of anything. I'm always learning stuff. I'm always, trying to find out new information. And so when I was researching for the program tonight, I learned an awful lot. And I so want to share some of that with you tonight. I'll try not to overwhelm you. There are some points in the program where you might be going, oh my gosh, how am I going to remember all of this? Don't worry about remembering anything. So the program tonight is on rain gardens. And so I want to start by just kind of finding out a little bit about how much you folks already know about rain gardens. Is there anybody in the group who already has a rain garden established in their yard? Okay. How many people are thinking about maybe putting one in? Okay, a few people. How many people have no idea what a rain garden is and that's the reason she came tonight? Okay, all right. And how many of you are here because it's Tuesday night, it's in February, and in Georgia Bay, there's not a whole lot else going on? Fair enough. That's okay. We won't hold that against you. Well, rain gardens are something that, at least around here, I have found not a lot of people have ever heard of and don't really know what they're all about. So tonight I'm going to try to give you some information about what rain gardens are all about. Rain gardens are not, because I think that's important. And then we'll talk about how do you go about establishing one, and my favorite part, what kinds of plants you want to put in your rain garden once you get it established. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight. Now, full disclosure, most of the information from my program tonight came from this wonderful publication, Rain Gardens, a how-to manual for homeowners. This was put together by the Wisconsin DNR, by the U.S. Geologic Survey, Applied Ecological Services, which is a restoration company, and Prairie Nursery down in Westfield, Wisconsin, which a lot of you are familiar with, back in 2003. And for a while, you could pick this up at different DNR locations and things like that. It's not in print anymore. You can download it. There's a number of places, actually, I found on the internet where you can download it. And at the end of the program, I will give you the link and a QR code for those of you who are really technological. and you can take a look at that publication and download it. It's got some really good stuff in it. It's got a lot of the information I'm going to talk about tonight. It also has a lot of plans. There's 10 or 11 different plans for rain gardens in there, and it gives you a plant list and shows you how to arrange things. So really, really very valuable. And I also, as I was researching, I found this same brochure, the same publication, in a lot of different states. Like North Carolina has a publication that's very, very similar that, and in fact, they credit Wisconsin for the information that they have. Chicago Botanic Garden has it on their website. The same publication has been shared really widely, so you're going to find it in a lot of places. I found it places I wasn't really expecting. So, long story short, you don't have to remember anything that I tell you in the program tonight because it's all in the book. You can go to sleep right now. I'll wake you up at the end and show you the QR code, and you'll be, no, please don't do that. All right, we're going to start out really simple tonight. What is a rain garden? Well, this is kind of a simplified drawing of what a rain garden looks like, where you have a house where there's water that's running away from the house, and the water runs into kind of a catch basin that is full of plants. And that's essentially what a rain garden is. It's just an area in your landscape that's specifically designed to capture runoff, and that runoff is coming from surfaces like your roof, if you have a paved patio, sometimes from the lawn itself, sidewalks, roadways, driveways, whatever. So it's an area that's going to collect and hold water from your landscape. What it does is it allows the water to slowly soak down into the soil instead of washing off rapidly, washing off and running directly into storm drains or directly into a nearby body of water. So that's kind of what a rain garden is. It's just, you might hear it called a bioswale. You might hear it on bigger scales. They call it like a bioretention area, big fancy names. So it's just an area that's going to collect water that's running off surfaces that aren't absorbing rainfall. So why is a rain garden needed, or why are rain gardens important? Well, prior to a lot of human development, we had prairies and woodlands and wetlands. And every time it rained or snowed, that moisture would pool for a while, but eventually it would soak down into the ground, end up in the groundwater where it's supposed to be. Well, as we've developed more and more areas, we have more surfaces that don't absorb water. Roadways, sidewalks, roofs, parking lots. All of these areas are not going to soak up water. So what happens when it rains is the rainwater runoff carries all kinds of pollutants with it. If you think about all of the things that are on the ground, on streets especially, oil and gasoline and fertilizer from lawns and garbage and pet waste, all of those things, without being able, if the water isn't soaking into the ground, washing all of those things along with it. And of course, in most urban areas, that water flows directly into storm drains. And water from storm drains doesn't go to a water treatment plant. It goes directly into, in our case, the bay or Lake Michigan. So all of that stuff that's washing off is ending up directly in our water supplies. The EPA estimates that 70% of the water pollution in the U.S. comes from rainwater runoff. A lot of that, granted, is from agricultural areas. Usually when you think of water pollution, you think of a factory with a big pipe that's dumping all those nasty chemicals into the water. That's really a relatively small contribution to our water pollution problems. Runoff is accounting for an awful lot of that. A rain garden can help to filter those pollutants. As the water is flowing down through the soil, it's being filtered, and the soil particles are grabbing and holding on to the chemicals and the things that otherwise would be running right into the water. Rain gardens can also help remove sediment. If you think about, just the dust and dirt that accumulates on roads and parking lots, that will stay in the rain garden instead of washing off into a body of water. So they're very, very effective at that. Now you might be thinking, well, I have grass, I have a lawn, and that's gonna hold and filter some of those pollutants. But lawns are not very efficient at that. they have shallow root systems, and they're not going to help with water infiltration as much as deeper rooted plants. We'll take a look at another slide later that'll demonstrate that. But compared to an average lawn, a rain garden or an intentional planting can absorb and infiltrate up to 30% more water. Rain gardens are, long story short, a very efficient way for a homeowner to help cut down on this, what they call non-point source pollution, the rainwater runoff that's carrying all of this nasty stuff into our bodies of water. So the benefits, well, I already told you the first benefit, improving water quality, filtering those chemicals and pollutants out of our rainwater runoff and keeping them out of our bodies of water. Rain gardens can have a lot of other benefits too. On a small scale, they can actually help prevent flooding. Again, if that water isn't running off into the street, running off into the storm drains, and being held on your property, that's going to help prevent localized flooding. If you've ever driven through the dip right before the Michigan Street Bridge when it's been raining heavily, all that water that's running in there, if some of that can be held back, it's going to help reduce those problems. Rain gardens can help recharge groundwater because, again, the water is being held and it infiltrates down instead of running off and ending up somewhere else. And in some areas, groundwater is becoming a huge issue. We're drawing out groundwater much more quickly than nature can replace it. So again, it's a small scale thing, but a lot of rain gardens could make quite a big difference. Beautiful. Just like, when you design your rain garden, it's going to be just like designing any kind of a flower bed. You want it to look nice. So you're going to enhance the aesthetics of your property and your neighborhood by putting these things in. They also provide a lot of habitat. Especially if you're using native plants, you're going to be providing habitat for birds, butterflies, bees, insects, all of those kinds of things. So it's going to be a benefit to you in that way. They're easy to maintain. Once you get the rain garden established, it's not a real difficult, not a high maintenance kind of an area to keep that going. So lots of benefits to putting a rain garden into your landscape. Now, a little bit about what a rain garden isn't, because I think people, just the name kind of makes it sound like, well, I don't know if that's something I want. Well, first of all, a rain garden is not a pond. You can create a pond in conjunction with your rain garden, and they can work together. But the water in your rain garden is only going to be there for a day or two. You're going to collect the water, but then it's going to infiltrate and disappear relatively quickly. So you don't really have a pond. You can't put goldfish in there or anything like that. Because the water drains away fairly quickly, it's not going to breed mosquitoes. Mosquitoes need something like 7 to 15 days to develop. And so if the water is draining away quickly, you're not going to have any mosquito problems. They're not high maintenance, as I mentioned before, other than a little weeding and possibly thinning out plants that get a little bit aggressive. Not lots of maintenance going on there. And they don't have to be expensive. Now, you certainly could contract with someone to come in and do all of the digging and the planting and everything for you. You can also get creative and figure out ways of keeping the budget very reasonable so that it's not an expensive, not a huge investment right up front. So now let's look at the planning and how do you get started on this whole project? We know why a rain garden is good. Now, how are we going to go about doing it? Well, the first thing you're going to want to do is kind of look at your landscape and get a feel. You're going to start kind of getting a feel for where the impervious surfaces are, where's the sidewalk and the roof and so on, your patio, where the plantings already are. And you'll start to collect some data, some information that'll help you figure out where to put the garden and how big to make it and so on. And again, this is going to sound like it's getting a little bit complicated. It's all in the book. So you don't have to worry too much about all of this technical stuff that I'm going to talk about. Where should the rain garden go? There's a lot of, not restrictions, but a lot of criteria in order to, really get a good spot for your rain garden. So these are things you're going to want to think about. First of all, full sun if possible, at least 6 hours of sun. Now this depends on what kind of things you're planting in your garden. If you're doing more shade types of plants, ferns and things like that, then certainly you can get away with less sun. But a lot of the native plants are things that like a lot of sun, and so you want to try to find a sunny location, besides the fact that you don't want to put your rain garden right underneath a tree. You want it to be at least 10 feet away from your home foundation, and that's simply because you don't want any chances of that water infiltrating back to your house and causing problems with your foundation. You want to keep them away from your well or septic system. You can't plant your rain garden on top of a septic field. That's kind of, makes sense. You don't want to have them directly over sewer lines or laterals. Make sure that you call dig a tot line before you do any kind of digging for your garden. Even if it's going to be fairly shallow, you want to get that all checked out ahead of time. This is the tricky one for Door County. Ideally, the bottom of your rain garden is going to have at least a foot of soil before you hit bedrock or groundwater. Anybody here have a foot of topsoil in their yard? Okay, maybe Southern Door, you might get away with that. So this is one where you may have to get a little creative. If you don't have as much soil and you can't go as deeply, you may want to make a bigger, shallower kind of a garden. Ideally, you want to have a certain depth of soil underneath your rain garden so that filtration can take place through the soil before it gets into the groundwater, gets into the bedrock. Don't put them under trees. And the main reason for that is trees have roots. And digging through tree roots, dig the basin for your rain garden is going to be a real pain in the neck, and the back, and the shoulders. And it's also not very good for the tree. If you're digging out a lot of the tree's roots and disturbing those, or if you're funneling water into this area, some kinds of trees aren't going to like having their feet that wet. Even though it's a relatively short period of time, some kinds of trees aren't going to really like that much. Try to stay away from, look at where the canopy of the tree is and try to stay out from underneath the tree canopy. Not where water already ponds. Now this seems kind of counterintuitive. If you've got a low spot in your yard and there's already water collecting there, wouldn't you want to put the garden there? Well, not really. If the water is already ponding in your yard, it may indicate that the soil is not draining very well, not as well as it should be. You actually want to have fairly well-drained soil underneath your rain garden. So you might put your rain garden a little upslope from that low area, collect some of the water first and help it infiltrate so that you don't have that wet, soggy spot down at the bottom. You can either put your rain garden close to the house, catch water directly from a downspout. You can put it a little further away from the house where you might collect water from downspouts as well as part of your lawn or patio or something like that. It just depends on where the areas are that you want to collect water from. So in this example, you can see they kind of mapped out where their trees were, where the different, where the house is, where the patio is, and they kind of came up with 3 different areas where they could put rain gardens in. In the upper right hand there, location, it looks like there's a downspout, a couple of downspouts there that they can funnel into that bed. It's away from the trees, near a turf area. The one in the lower right, there again, they've got runoff coming from the downspouts. I'm not sure if that's a deck or a patio, but there may be some runoff there, maybe a little bit from the lawn. And then they've got a location in the front yard too, where collecting water from a downspout. So they've identified several different areas. By the way, there's nothing saying that you can't put in more than one rain garden. If you want to establish a lot of small ones, that's certainly a way that you can go. We get into some kind of technical things, and I just want to say right up front, these are recommendations. This is like the ideal, wonderful, perfectly engineered rain garden is going to follow these different procedures. They're just guidelines. So, you always have to adapt. You always have to get a little creative with what you're doing, depending on your own landscape. Depth of your pond, or the depth of your rain garden, is going to depend on your slope. Now, if you've got a backyard like this, probably not an ideal location for a rain garden. In fact, they recommend that if your yard slopes more than 12%, I'm pretty sure this one does, they don't recommend putting a rain garden in. Maybe you could put some small retention areas way up at the top of the slope to capture some of the water before it goes down the hillside. But this is probably not the most ideal. Again, depending on the slope that you have in your yard, that's going to determine how deep you want to make your rain garden. If you've got a fairly level yard or with a little bit of a slope, maybe 3 or 4 inches is all you're going to need. If you have a little bit more of a slope to your yard, maybe you're going to go up to as much as 6 or 8 inches in depth. Probably not any deeper than that. So the first thing you're going to determine after you kind of get an idea where you might want to put your garden is what the slope is like and how deep you might have to dig that. Then you're going to look at the area that's going to drain into your rain garden. And again, in this example, they've got one garden in the front that's quite close to the house, and that one looks like it has a downspout that's feeding almost directly into it. But then they've got another one in the backyard. It's a little further away where it's going to capture water from a downspout, but also from part of the lawn area. So in this case, they looked at the size of the roof and they said, well, about a quarter of our roof is draining off into this one downspout. So they calculate out roughly the square footage of the roof that's draining in there, and then the area in the back. And again, just kind of get an idea how much. It's pretty hard to really estimate real accurately how much water is going to end up in your rain garden. You can kind of get an idea of what the drainage area is. If you've got a patio that the water is going to run off into your rain garden, you can measure that. If you've got a lawn area that's going to drain in, you can measure those. And so then you're going to get an idea of, how many square feet are going to drain into your rain garden. That's another factor that you keep in mind. You can do a soil infiltration test too. Once you have identified an area where you think you want to have the rain garden, you want your rain garden to be fairly well drained because you do want that water to disappear within a day or 2, maybe 3. And if you remember back to Master Gardener, those of you who were the Master Gardener training, there's a couple different ways you can figure out how quickly your soil drains. One way is to dig a hole about 6 or 8 inches deep, fill it up with water, and see how quickly the water drains away. If the water is still sitting there after a day or 2 or 3, then you probably have some drainage problems. The other thing you can do is it's called a ribbon test. You just take a handful of soil, you work enough water into it so that you can kind of form it with your hands, and you try to kind of squeeze that soil out in a ribbon. If you have a lot of clay in your soil, you'll get a longer ribbon. If you have a lot of sand in there, it's not going to really form a ribbon at all. So just by touch, by the texture of the soil, you can get a good estimate for whether or not it's well drained enough. Again, if you've got really heavy clay soil, you may want to look at amending it a little bit to help improve drainage. Otherwise, the water will be sitting there for quite a long time, and that's not what you want your rain gardens. We got a lot of information here. This is like algebra. Who said we were going to use that? Your drainage area, you've got the depth of your rain garden, you've got, how well drained it is, all of these different factors. Those all kind of get funneled together into formulas. And again, that's in the booklet. But it's going to give you an idea what size and depth of rain garden you need. Again, recommendation. If the calculations say that you need a rain garden that's 300 square feet and you don't have room for that, a small rain garden is great too. Or if you can make it bigger than what the recommendation is, that's okay too. They're guidelines. So don't get too worried about all of the calculations and things that go into that. Usually, and a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about right now is just kind of general garden design. It applies to rain gardens as well as many other kinds of plantings. The shape of your garden is whatever pleases you. Usually they recommend shapes like kidney shapes or rounded or crescent, maybe kind of an oval shape. Sometimes people get creative and they make the shape of a butterfly or a flower, whatever fits into your landscape and suits your aesthetic is wonderful. Depending on the kind of landscape you have, you might go with a more rectangular kind of a rain garden. I thought this was an interesting design where they used stone, like wall stone basically, for the sides of the basin that holds the water. Um, you can see on the left-hand side there's a little gap in the stone. That looks like the area that the water flows into the garden from the grassy area. I'm not sure if this is at a school or what kind of a building it is. But hey, if a rectangle works and suits your landscape and your aesthetic, go for it. There's no rule that says you can't do that. Or you can go with a more linear kind of a garden. If your landscape has a kind of a ditch in front of it anyway, maybe you can enhance that and make work it so that water from your lawn drains into that. That seems to be the way this one is working, where the water will drain in on either side. You'll notice that they've got kind of an overflow area, right, where that overflow is into the street. There is a little bit of a raised area built up there. But if the rainfall and the water goes over that, it's just going to go down into the street and on into the storm drains. They've held some of it back. So again, whatever shape seems to work. A little later on, we'll look at another kind of a linear garden they placed in between, like in the side yard, in between two homes, where there was a little bit of a lower area, and they used that for their rain garden. Okay, so we know how big it is. We know what shape it's going to be. We get to the part about laying out the garden, laying out the shape. You can use a garden hose or a rope to kind of shape it around and get it the right size and shape that you want. You can actually go out and mark the area out with lime or chalk. I'm not sure what kind of chalk you use, but lay that all out, figure out if it's the right dimensions, and figure out if it fits into the landscape properly. Now, if you have sod, you're going to have to kill the sod before you can plant the rain garden. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. You can take the quickest and easiest method is to use some kind of herbicide. You can spray the area. Within a couple of weeks, you'll be able to work it up and dig the bed and get it prepared. If you don't want to use chemicals, you can use layers of cardboard or lots of newspapers. You can use black plastic. Actually, you could go out right now, you could lay out your bed, figure out where your bed is going to be, cover that area with black plastic, and even some of these relatively cool but sunny days, it's going to start to bake that grass and help kill it, so that when real spring gets here and you want to get out there and start digging, grass should be dead. If you have access to a sod cutter, you can use that, or you could just take a spade and actually remove the grass with the spade. If you do that, it's a good idea to stockpile that sod, because later on you can use it to help cover the berm or the rim of your rain garden. So you can put grass in there, you don't have to seed it. So that's what they did here. They've got the garden shape all laid out, they got the grass killed and dug out. In this example, you can see where the downspout is. So the water from their downspout is probably just going to come down that slope and into the V shape of their garden. So they've got it all laid out and grass cleared away. And then this is the part where you start doing the digging and actually forming the basin that will become your rain garden. Basically, what you're going to do is now you know the depth of your garden. In this example, it's 9 inches. They wanted their garden to be 9 inches deep. So they ran a string that got the string level so that they knew where the 9 inches was. And then start removing soil from the upper part of the bed, the upslope, moving it to the lower end to create that berm. And you just keep kind of working the soil out and working the soil out until you've got about a 9-inch depth from that string that you marked as level. You want the bottom of the bed to be as level as you can get it now, because you don't want pockets that are going to hold water longer. But again, do the best that you can. If it's not 100% absolutely on bubble, it's going to be fine. It'll work just great. You'll notice on the upslope end of the bed, it's a little more gradual slope kind of coming into the garden. And there's a fairly abrupt slope on the end, the stopping end of it. So you get the garden all dug out like that. This is kind of what it's going to look like. I'm glad I don't have the soil that these people have, because this looks really awful. But, a lot of times, especially with newer construction, the fill that they bring in is not going to be prime topsoil. So you might be facing something like this where it's a lot of gravel. You can see how they've got it leveled out. They've got the basin is dug out. They've formed that berm around the edges. In this case, and in most instances, they recommend that you amend the soil with compost. In that previous example, I definitely would be putting a lot of compost in there to help improve not only the fertility of the soil, but also just the texture of it. And that's what the people in this picture are doing. They're adding some mulch or some compost, work that into the soil, and then level it all back out again so that you've got your nice rich base ready for your planting to take place. Now, what should I plant? Again, this is like any kind of garden design. You can think about, wow, what are all the cool things I can add into this? Usually recommend native plants, and I would recommend native plants for a lot of reasons. Native plants are adapted to our soils and to our climate. They are hardy in the winter, and they're tough in the summertime when things can be dry and hot. They have very deep roots, and this picture shows how deep the roots. You know, your bluegrass, Kentucky bluegrass, is only going to have a couple inches of root system. Some of these prairie plants are going to go 7, 8, 10 feet if you have that much soil. We don't around here. But those deeper roots, those roots are actually channels for water to infiltrate. So the water is going to kind of run along the roots and deeper into the soil. So the deeper you can get those roots growing, the better. Native plants have very deep roots in most instances. Natives are also going to attract a greater variety of pollinating insects, birds, butterflies, and so on. And they're also easier to maintain because you don't have to fertilize them and baby them a lot once they're established. So natives are recommended. Again, as with most gardens, you want to plan for blooms throughout the season, as early in the spring as possible and as late in fall possible, just so that your garden continues to look attractive, but again, also for the benefit of wildlife, pollinators, and so on. Look at having a lot of different heights and textures, taller wispy things, shorter clumpy things. In garden design, they usually recommend, that you make groups of plants, clusters of 3 to 5 to 7 plants. I kind of garden, I follow the theory of drifts of one. Buy one plant and I put it there, and I buy one plant and put it there. And it doesn't, it looks a little, it's a hodgepodge. For more impact, you can plant groups of plants. And you'll see this in some of the examples that I'll show you in a few minutes, where they did a drift of plants or a bigger clump of plants, just for the impact, just for the appearance of it. But again, do what you want to do, what suits you. Don't forget to include things like sedges and grasses in your garden. They provide a lot of benefits. It's a different texture. They provide a nice background for your flowering plants. Many of the sedges will stay green during the winter months. Grasses can have great fall color, so even though they're not blooming, they have a lot of color. And grasses can also help to support some of the taller flowers that you might put in your garden. If you've got a prairie blazing star that's 5 feet tall, they get floppy sometimes. And so if you've got grasses around them to help hold them in place, that really is helpful. Here's an example of a rain garden. This is actually down in Neenah. It's at the headquarters of Wild Ones, the national headquarters. They have several rain gardens that they've established around their property. This one shows a lot of those things that I was just talking about. They've got groups of flowers. They've got the pinkish ones in the front, I think are a nodding onion, a wild onion. There's purple cone flower, which you'll see in a lot of these pictures. I think some Joe Pye weed in the background. There's some black-eyed Susans. And then they've got grasses in there as well. Textures. They even have a tree. I think that birch tree in the background is actually right on the edge of the rain garden, because birches don't mind a little bit of moisture. So this design incorporates a lot of those principles that we've been talking about. And if you're like me and you're not a very good designer, don't panic, because there are lots of designs out there. As I mentioned, the Rain Garden Handbook has 10 or 11 different designs in it. The nice thing about those designs is they tell you, okay, it's this many square feet and it's for a sunny site with silty soil. Or here's one for a semi-shady site with sandy soil. So they give you all the criteria, and it's real easy to find one that suits your particular landscape. This one, the slide, I believe, came from Prairie Moon Nursery, which is in Minnesota. They have actually have a kit. You can buy a 32 or 38 plants, something like that, that are designed, when they give you the plan and they give you all the plants and away you go. You don't even have to think very hard about it. So there's lots of plans out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can find something that has the plants in it that you like and go with that. As far as size plants, this depends a lot on your budget. They recommend bigger plants because they're going to fill in more quickly and like stabilize your garden. But you also have to think about how much money you want to spend. If you have a big rain garden and you're putting in 50 of some kind of plant, a grass or sedge or something, you might want to go with plugs because they're going to be less expensive. They'll establish really quickly and they'll get going. But if you have the budget for it, if you can go with bigger sizes, like a quart, 4-inch or so pot is a nice size to put in. The thing with plugs that sometimes happens is if you get them all planted and then you get a heavy rainfall, the rain will wash them all loose, and you have to go back and replant them. Bigger plants, they'll tend to stay in place better if you get rain right away. See what's available. So the plant you like may not be available in a bigger size or a smaller size. So keep your budget in mind and buy the plants that you can that are best going to suit your budget. So here we are with an almost finished rain garden. They've got the basin dug out. They've got the plants all spaced in there. They recommend you space the plants about a foot apart to begin with. Got those all planted. It's recommended that you put down a layer of chip mulch, either shredded or chipped mulch, a couple inches of that. Make sure that you're not covering the crowns of your plants. Then you can see in this picture too where they used the sod that they cut out on the berm on the end of the garden. So they've got that all stuck back down in there to help cover that bare soil and help to stabilize the berm as well. That brings us to maintenance. The first couple of seasons, you are going to have to do a bit of maintenance with your garden, just like you would with any other flower bed. The first thing you're going to need to do after it's planted is to water everything well. And again, you would do that with any kind of a planting to help those plants get a good start, get them established. If it's a dry season, if Mother Nature is not cooperating for the first season, you may have to water every week or so, again, to get those plants established and get them going and happy. Also recommended that you add a little bit of mulch each year, replenish it. Again, that'll help to hold the weeds down for one thing, and it also helps to hold a little bit more moisture during times when your rain garden is not actually catching rain. And weeding, unfortunately, weeding is going to be a necessity. You'll probably want to label the plants that you put in, especially if you're not familiar with what the plants look like when they're young, because you don't want to pull out all of the things that you worked so hard to put in there. So put labels in with your plants and so you know what you're weeding and what you're not. Then we get to the question of, do I clean up the garden or do I leave the garden alone? I'm very much in the lazy gardener camp. I don't cut back. Well, there's just a few things that I cut back in the fall. Mostly I leave everything standing. By the end of the winter, most of the plant stems and leaves are beaten down by the snow anyway. But I like to leave all the foliage and stuff there. Many of these native plants are going to provide seeds, food for birds. There are insects that winter in the plant stems in many cases. So if you go in and you clean everything out in the fall, you're eliminating a lot, and you're eliminating a lot of good organic matter that you can, get recycled back into your garden. If you do want to do some cleaning up, it's recommended that you wait until early spring or once things start to grow again. And ideally, if you've got prairie plants in there, you might want to burn your rain garden. In town, that's kind of frowned upon. So instead, what you can do is you can go in and you can cut the plants back. Leave them fairly tall. Leave them maybe 6 to 8 inches tall. As the plants start to grow, those stems are going to disappear. You won't even know that they're there. And it's a little bit easier on your back if you don't have to clear everything out. Don't be afraid to have a little bit of a messy garden. That brings us to mission time. We have wonderful goodies in the back supplied by some of our master gardeners. Barb, it's your turn to come up and do the interpretive dance. Um, we will take about 15 minutes or so to have some nibbles, and then we'll come back and we'll get to all the really pretty pictures of things that you can put in your garden and lots of good examples to inspire you. So we'll see you back again in like 15 minutes. Yes, yes. Many of the plants that I'm going to be talking about are actually, we have seeds for those. So check those out, take some seeds home with you, and help yourself to some bees. All right, welcome back, everybody. Now we get to the fun, I think the most fun part of the program. I want to talk a little bit about some of the plants that you can consider putting into your rain garden, and then we'll just take a look at a lot of examples to kind of give you some inspiration, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the different features those different rain gardens have. So we're going to be talking about great natives for rain garden plants, and we're going to kind of go through the seasons, starting with some earlier spring or spring and early summer kinds of flowers. Most of these that I'm talking about are full sun, but we will address a few shade plants along the way. So first slide here, a couple of my very favorites for spring and early summer. Starting on the left, we have Jacob's Ladder. Jacob's Ladder is a really nice plant for the front edge of your garden beds. It stays fairly short and mounded, has these beautiful baby blue flowers in the spring, and then once it's done flowering, you can kind of shear it a little bit if you want to, and it's just a really nice, neat little mound of foliage. It'll take some shade as well, so it's a nice one to put in maybe a semi-shaded area. In the middle, we've got blue flag iris. You think of blue flag as growing in wetlands, but it will tolerate quite long periods of dry as well. So again, in a rain garden where it's going to be wet part of the time and then kind of dry out, it's an ideal little plant. Right hand on the top is golden Alexanders, which is a relative of parsley and dill. So it is a host plant for swallowtail caterpillars. Has nice yellow flowers, looks kind of like yellow Queen Anne's lace. And then the lower right-hand side is celandine poppy, which is again, a kind of a semi-shade sort of plant, beautiful bright yellow color early in the season. So these are some things that are going to pop early on in your garden and kind of kick off the season. If you've got a little bit more shade, then you can go with some woodland type plants. And again, going from left to right, we have a woodland phlox, wild phlox, not the dame's rocket, not the invasive one. In the middle, we have wild geranium, which is a really nice, has a fairly long bloom time, will take quite a bit of sun as well. And if you have shade in your rain garden, don't forget about ferns. There's a lot of lovely ferns that can be used. Lady fern is one that's used a lot in rain gardens. Ostrich fern, although as some of you know, that can get a little out of control sometimes. You could use painted fern if you wanted to go with a non-native painted fern. That would work well in a rain garden kind of a situation. We start getting into summer. For left hand, I always like to recommend that people put milkweed in just about any kind of a bed. You may not want common milkweed because that tends to spread very quickly. This one is just called red milkweed, or sometimes it's called swamp milkweed because it does grow in slightly wetter areas. Butterflies and lots of other pollinating insects just absolutely love it. The flower right in the middle, tall one, is a penstemon. There's a number of different kinds of penstemon that are, again, really good for pollinators. Hummingbirds like them. Upper right is Joe Pye weed, another one of my favorites for just about any kind of a garden. Pye weed does get big, so you want to kind of consider, and I mean 5-6 feet big. So you might want to consider that in your garden planning. There are shorter varieties that are available, And I'm not going to go into the whole whether the native and the natives and the hybrids are better or worse, but there are shorter Joe Pye weeds that I think are still just as effective and can work a little bit better if you have a smaller scale garden. The lower left there is one of my favorites, turtle head. It has kind of related to snapdragons, and it has a flower that looks like a little white turtle's head, pollinated by bees, bumblebees. So you can sit there and you can watch the bumblebees crawl inside or pollinate it. Sue had a great flower in the Master Gardener newsletter, a hybridized turtle head called Hot Lips that's bright pink, and the bee had worked his way in there, and all you could see was his little bee butt sticking out the back there. And then the one, the lower right, is blue vervain. Now, vervain is a plant not a lot of people are familiar with. I really kind of like it. It has a real interesting kind of a candelabra shape to the flowers. They're quite small, but it gives a little different kind of a texture to the garden, and it has a beautiful color. And the blue vervain does like a little more moisture. There's another closely related variety called hoary vervain that likes drier conditions. This would be a good one for a rain garden. Most of the rain garden designs you see are going to include blazing stars or liatris. And there are a lot of different varieties out there, so you can kind of pick and choose what height you want or what type of flowers. The one on the left is called Spike or Marsh Blazing Star. It's fairly tall, about 3 to 4 feet. The one in the middle is Meadow Blazing Star. So you can see it has a little bit different flower structure. I don't know why, but Meadow Blazing Star is an absolute butterfly magnet. And butterflies will go to that particular variety, even if the other blazing stars around it are blooming. They love that one. I don't know why. But it's a great, great butterfly plant. Really beautiful flowers. And then the one on the right-hand side is Prairie Blazing Star. This is the tallest of them. This can get to be easily 5 feet. So if you're using the Prairie Blazing Star, you're probably going to want to plant some shorter plants around it or some grasses to kind of help hold it up so it doesn't flop. But you'll see these in a lot of the gardens examples that I'll show you. A little red, white, and blue for midsummer. The left hand is cardinal flower. Cardinal flower is a type of lobelia. It's a lovely plant, but most of the time it only lasts 3 or 4 seasons for whatever reason. But it will self-seed. So your original plant might die out, then you're going to see it growing somewhere else. And even if you have to replant it every couple of years, it's worth it just to see the hummingbirds working that plant. White flower is Culver's root. Again, I like this one because of the shape. It's got that very candelabra kind of shape and the pretty color. It's fairly tall, about 4 feet. The one on the right is another lobelia, the blue lobelia, which you generally find growing along stream banks or moister areas. So that's a good one to put in the middle of the rain garden where it's going to stay moist a little bit longer. Very, very beautiful color. As we get into late summer and early fall, then we start to appreciate things like the asters. The aster in this photo is the New England aster, which is the biggest and probably showiest of our native asters. Gets to be about 4 feet tall. There's a lot of other varieties of aster that you can use. There's a woodland aster that likes a little bit more shade. There's sky blue aster and crooked stem aster, and there's all kinds of them that you can use. The middle photo, goldenrod. A lot of people are a little nervous about goldenrod because it can get to be kind of aggressive and may try to take over your garden. So you want to be a little bit careful about what variety you plant. This one is showy goldenrod, which I think we have some seeds of in the back. That doesn't get quite as crazy and take over. Ohio goldenrod would be another good one that tends to stay where you plant it and doesn't run amok throughout your garden. Right-hand side is a flower called ironweed. Beautiful color, very unique kind of a color, little fuzzy flowers, which the pollinators just love. And these are, late summer going into fall kinds of flowers that you can use. Don't forget about the sedges and the grasses, too. We have to talk a little bit about those. Sedges, in particular, are kind of an overlooked group of plants, but there's a few of them that are on the market that are really quite attractive and really work well in rain garden situations. The left-hand side, that one is called Eastern Star Sedge. a fairly short sedge, maybe a foot or so tall, and it has these unique little starry kind of seed heads or clusters on it. The one in the middle is called palm sedge. The leaves look a little like a palm leaf in the way that they branch, and it's got kind of brownish seed clusters. And then the one on the right, this has become one of my favorites. It's called Gray's sedge. Sometimes it's called morning star sedge, which is confusing with Easter star sedge. Um, but the Gray's sedge has these really unique kind of Sputnik-looking seed capsules, which are very attractive. The flowers on sedges are nothing to speak of. They're insignificant. But the seed heads can be really attractive. And as I mentioned it before, some sedges will stay green during the winter. So they add a little bit of interest in the off-season too. And then we'll talk about a couple of grasses. Again, left to right, the left-hand side is switchgrass, which is a tall grass, about 4 feet, but it has very airy, very light, fluffy kinds of seed heads. The one in the middle is Canada wild rye, a little bit shorter, maybe about 2 to 3 feet, has a very unique kind of seed head to it. And if you want to really go big, you can go with big blue stem, 6 to 7 feet tall, gorgeous fall color, really wonderful fall color. So even though you don't really have blooms on it, it's a really effective plant to put in the back of the bed, kind of backdrop for everything else. Now let's take a look at a couple of some examples. And again, you'll see a lot of the plants that we've been talking about in these. The one on the left here, you can see that they have some milkweed, looks like common milkweed growing in the background. In the front, red flower is a Monarda, probably Jacob Klein, which is not a native, but it's really, really attractive to butterflies. Behind it, the purple is another Monarda, might be the native wild Monarda, or it might be one of the cultivars. But again, that's another one that's really good for butterflies. The thing in this photo is you'll notice in the background there's a culvert. So they created a rain garden where there was already a culvert draining into this area, collecting water from wherever it was. So they took advantage of that drainage that was there already and just made a beautiful garden out of it. Right-hand photo, there we've got the liatris, the blazing star. Like I mentioned, they show up a lot in these garden designs. We've got the black-eyed Susans. They're a wonderful plant for rain gardens. And some purple coneflower, which is another one that you see in a lot of the rain garden plans. On the left-hand side in the front, not blooming, but I think that's Baptisia, a wild false indigo. It's a nice plant. It's kind of a shrub almost when it's growing, but it is a perennial. It dies back to the ground in the fall. That's another one that's really good for pollinators. A few more examples here. I like this little pocket in the middle of the lawn. Again, with a lot of purple coneflower, lots of grasses in that example. Other things, it looks like there's shrubs maybe in the background there too. The picture here on the lower left, I just put in to show kind of what a new rain garden may look like when you get that first rainfall in there. It doesn't really look like much. It doesn't look too exciting, but it's going to take a little while once those plants get established. But you can see how it was constructed. You know, they've got the inflow area, they've got the berm on the end to kind of hold the water in. They've got a nice layer of mulch there over everything. It's a great example. And then on the right-hand side, black-eyed Susans, big drifts. That's a good example of a drift of color with some grasses. And I think Joe Pye weed in the back. I think the pinkish back there is Joe Pye weed. Black-eyed Susans come back again. These two have a lot of cardinal flower in them. It shows you a little bit better the size and the structure of that plant. The white in the left-hand photo is boneset, which is related to Joe Pye weed. You can think of it kind of as a white-flowered Joe Pye weed. By itself, it's not real exciting, but it works really well in gardens because of that color sets off all of the other blooms. It is very good for pollinators, though, as well, and it's tough as nails. It's very, very hard to kill. And then this garden, again, we've got the cardinal flower, a lot of cardinal flower in there. Looks like some maybe Monarda or maybe a smaller Joe Pye weed there in the front. And some shrub areas in the back, too, that they incorporated. This one, you can kind of tell, they got this one right close to the house, so it's probably just catching water from a downspout. Some goldenrods in there, some nice well-behaved goldenrod, maybe Ohio goldenrod. And on the right-hand side, I believe that's a milkweed that's has formed pods. I'm pretty sure that's the red or swamp milkweed. Photo on the bottom, kind of a linear, again, lots and lots of liatris or blazing star in there. Grasses, purple coneflower, some black-eyed Susans. And then the one at the top, I kind of threw that in because it's sort of a hodgepodge of different things. They've got some shrubs in there. They've got some yarrow in the front, the white, some rather interesting grasses. I think that part that's kind of right in the middle, I think those are the heads of some type of grass. I don't know for sure which one, muley grass maybe or something. There's not a lot of bloom going on in there, but there's a lot of texture and a lot of interest in that bed. Just a couple more examples. A street, again, a street side linear kind of a rain garden where in the overflow, if the rain garden does overflow, it's going to end up in the street there. But they've got a lot of grasses in the back, some nice tall grasses for the backdrop, black-eyed Susans. It almost looks like sedums in the front, which kind of confuses me because that's not really a rain garden plant. But I guess if they've got it up on the berm, it would be a little better drained there. Then on the right-hand side, this is the one I referred to earlier that's between two houses where was a little bit of a dip, and they decided to use that as the basis for their rain garden. Again, not a lot blooming in there in this particular photo, but a nice, neat, compact garden to catch water maybe from both of those houses. Wanted to include a couple of gardens that had shrubs in them because shrubs are great for a lot of different reasons. They provide structure, they provide some interest when the winter, especially if you've got like a red twig dogwood. Great winter interest. A lot of the shrubs have berries that birds like, particularly the dogwoods and viburnums. Maybe a small variety of serviceberry could go in there. Got a lot of grassy kinds of things going in there. The one on the right shows the left, shows a lot of fall color, probably dogwoods, again, for fall color. They're great. And in shrubs, they're going to help give you a little bit more interest, a little bit more texture and color in the winter months. And so I had to throw in a couple of pictures of winter rain gardens just to show you they can be pretty at any time of the year. Again, the upper left there, you can see those grasses or sedges that are staying somewhat green. So you've got a little bit of color there. The frost on all of the taller plants in the fall is beautiful. And in the right-hand photo, we've got winterberry, which is a native holly. So you've got some red berries for interest in the wintertime too. So these are just kind of, like I said, this is inspiration. This is just thinking about different combinations of plants, different things that you can incorporate. And you can see there's a lot of variety. Some of the rain gardens in these pictures probably don't strictly follow the rules for setting up a rain garden. But as I mentioned before, all of the things I talked about are recommendations to help get you started. You'll find as you dive into these projects that you have to do a little bit of modification and a little bit of creativity, but you'll end up with something beautiful no matter what you really put in there. And that's the beauty of most kinds of gardening. So with that, this is the website where you can download the Rain Garden Handbook or the QR code, which you can use. That'll take you right to the website, and you can view that booklet, or you can print it off if you'd like. It's quite lengthy. It's like, I don't know, 20 pages or something. But I highly recommend you take a look at it, and you will get a lot of inspiration, a lot of ideas from that as well, and it'll answer a lot of questions if you can't remember everything that we talked about tonight. So with that, I would say if anybody has any questions or any comments that you would like to share. Yeah, Lucille.
What about here?
Darn, I wish nobody would access. Yeah, when you're.
What works with them? What do we need to avoid? What do we need to think about?
Well, there are some plants that deer like better than others. So you'll want to, you can look up deer-resistant plants. A lot of plants that I talked about in the program here are what I would say is deer resistant, which means it's not that the deer won't eat them, but they bounce back. They're pretty tough. And so, like if you have purple cone flowers and the deer come and eat those off, it will send up more buds. Um, some of the things like sedges, deer are not particularly fond of sedges. They're not particularly fond of some of the native grasses, so those are things that you might be able to use kind of as a buffer. You're first getting the garden established. If you're really worried about deer, you may actually have to fence it off for a while until the plants get established, until they're ready to take on that challenge. But it's like with any kind of a garden, it's tough to find stuff that the deer don't really want to eat. And it takes, yeah, you have to change it up. Yeah. You can use shiny mylar ribbon, or you can use noise deterrents, or you can set up a sprinkler, motion sensor sprinkler, or you have to sprays like liquid fence, those kinds of things. Anything else?
Milkweed.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, planting milkweed in your rain garden.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a good choice, or, I always thought that needed a little more drier soil.
It depends on the type of milkweed. The red milkweed or swamp milkweed that I talked about does like a little bit more moisture, so it does better. Common milkweed will grow just fine in a rain garden situation. That's the one that does run all over and tends to take over. One of the slides, when I was looking at it, actually looked like it had the butterfly milkweed in it, the orange flowered one, which does like it dry. So that kind of surprised me, but I think that they had it on the uphill side. Maybe it may have been right above the rain garden and not actually part of the rain garden. So I would think that moisture they would not be happy with that. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it depends on the variety. If you use the red milkweed, that seems to like a little bit more moisture and does really, really well. Yes, you had a question.
Well, since our climate seems to be changing a little bit and we don't have so much rain anymore, and I was just in Green Bay and the arborist conference was, and so the talk now is like, what kind of trees can you plant that can take drought in the Midwest?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's like a little bit of plant change happening in the rain garden?
Possibly.
Or are we wanting to harvest the rain to keep it in a rain barrel, or, instead of, there's really good places for rain gardens, yes, that
Mm-hmm.
run off to
Mm-hmm.
the lake and the bays and stuff.
Right.
And I was just curious about that, because that's now which we all should be looking at.
Yeah.
Plant material.
Right. Yeah, with climate change affecting precipitation, are we going to get more? Are we going to get less? When is it going to come? A lot of the models are saying that we will get less frequent rainfall, but when we get it, it's going to be heavier.
So in that case, the rain garden is actually.
And in that case, the rain garden would be beneficial. But we really don't know. As far as the plants for the rain garden, most of the stuff that we talked about are prairie plants. And so they're going to do okay. Many of them are found, grow much further south than us. So if someday our climate is, as they say, like St. Louis is now, most of those plants are probably going to be okay.
They're very adaptable to the conditions.
Most of them are, yeah. There's a few that might be affected as far as predicting which ones, but any of those plants that have the really deep root systems are gonna.
Survival of the fittest.
Yeah, exactly. Something like cardinal flower, if you've got a real dry summer, that's probably going to disappear. But a lot of those other plants are going to do just fine. Yes.
Is there any information about placing them like between the sidewalk and the road, in the parkway?
There were a couple examples there where they did that. They didn't have sidewalk. They put them at, right just before the roadway. I would, well, it would depend on the slope of the yard before it gets to the sidewalk. You know, if there is naturally some kind of runoff that's going to the sidewalk, I would say, yeah, if you could capture that before, if it's running directly through the sidewalk and over the hill strip and into the street, I would say, yeah, you could definitely put one in there.
Yeah, because I was thinking you could use the sidewalk and the curb as natural.
Those are your boundaries. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would think that would work. All right. Mhm. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you again for letting me come and talk to you tonight. And like I said, download that booklet.